Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Christ Central Devotional on Monday morning. It's spring, it's March, it's a new book, and today we're going to look at Hebrews. My name is Julian. I've got the first section today. Crikey, there's an awful lot here, and please forgive me for all of the omissions that I will make. Most of them are going to be accidental or out of ignorance, but hopefully I'll give you something to talk about, something to think about, and something to reflect on today. So, where should we start? We'll start with a brief introduction to Hebrews. Why is it called Hebrews? Presumably because it's written to Jews, although it's written to the church. Who's it written by? Not sure. Most of the authors that most of the books I've read say, we don't know either. I've got an old Bible somewhere that says it's Paul's letter to the Hebrew, but most modern Bibles seem to say that's not the case. And apparently it's written in very, very nice Greek. So there's an introduction to you. It does contain lots of references to the Old Testament all the way through, some of which I'll try and dig out today, and some of which hopefully other people will dig out later on. I think it assumes a good knowledge of the Old Testament and how the Messianic prophecies and the whole book's laid out. So I think it's going to stretch us a little bit, encourage us a lot, and hopefully it'll be a really good message to us at this time. So without further ado, we'll jump into reading today's passage, which is Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 to 6. And as you're all either blanked or looking attentive, I'm going to jump straight in. So, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have begotten you"? Or again, "I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son"? And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." Well, only 6 verses, but there's quite a lot in there. So what we'll do is we'll walk through it a bit at a time, and then I'll give you some comments on the way. So first of all, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers. That's a bit of a reference to the entire Old Testament as we know it. So in many ways, we've got prophets, we've got history, we've got poetry, we've got some law, and we've got parables, we've got visions, and it's all delivered through ordinary people, some of which are highborn, some of which aren't, but there are many different ways in which the message from God has been delivered to the people. And through many people, we've got numerous authors of the Old Testament. And some of them are focused on different things. Some of them are focused on the history. Some of them are focused on the prophecy. But in many ways, God has communicated with his people. That in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. So last days, what does that mean? Well, my understanding of that is since Jesus, but before the end of the world. So it's kind of nebulous, but at the same time, very, very specific. So since Jesus has been. And then the biggie, whom he appointed the heir of all things. Well, that's quite something, isn't it? He's going to inherit everything. So that surely is a mark of how important he is and who he is. And his inheritance will be everything. Through whom he also created the world. Well, we read at John's Gospel at Christmas time about God's relationship to his Son in that beautiful poetry at the beginning. And we read right at the beginning of Genesis how God was floating over the face of the water before everything was made. He's always been there. It's always going on. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. So one of the people I looked at, Mr. Pawson, says, as sunshine is to the sun, so glory is to the Son. So one being S-U-N, one being S-O-N. So it means that glory is part of God's being. It is part of everything who he is. You can't see the sunshine without seeing the sun, or the other way round. Or the other one, the exact imprint of God's nature. Imagine a signet ring. When that signet ring gets pushed into the wax, the ring remains with the owner, but the seal is carried everywhere as an imprint, and everyone knows when they see that seal who the letter's from. They are intrinsically linked to each other. So when we look at Jesus, we see God's glory, but when we only look at God through Jesus. So it's very difficult for us to separate one from the other. I think there's a big Greek word for that, which I can't think of off the top of my head. He upholds the universe by the power of his power. And then it says, after making purifications for sin, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Now, we looked at this when we looked at Colossians a bit, didn't we? We had the 3 R's, which I'll try and remember, and I've actually written down. So, as Jesus is able to make sacrifice to reconcile us to God, Jesus paid the price and redeemed from our separated state. So when we were separate from God, he has now restored our relationship with God. So once justice has been completed, Jesus is able to sit down beside God. Jesus made purification for what we've done, all those bad things, all those sins, and is now in an exalted position. So we've seen who Jesus is, and we've had a brief recap there of everything he's done. And in those few sentences, I've encompassed an awful lot of work. So having done all that, he sits down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the names he's inherited is more excellent than theirs. So he is in a very exalted position. We've already just read here that he sat down above the angels. Because what are the angels? Well, it appears that they appear in human form, but not always, because sometimes when they're described, they're not as people. They're messengers to God, and they communicate messages from God. We read at Christmas time how they turned up in multitudes to tell the shepherds what's going on, and what else do we know about them? And we know a little bit in Deuteronomy 33. It suggests that in actual fact they were there when the law was given. But what we've got with Jesus is not just a messenger from God telling us about God. We've got someone who is the imprint and reflection of God, effectively God himself telling us about how we're doing. And it's that imprint and reflection who's actually done everything for us by his grace to reconcile us to God. So there's a bit of a thing here, sort of like, we've got God himself come to us. We've got God himself do all this work to free us. So do we want to go back to relying on messengers again when we can communicate with God? It's, do we want to go back to that state we were in before? It can be tricky sometimes, but in actual fact, isn't it brilliant that we can communicate directly with Jesus? Aren't we fortunate? Aren't we blessed that we can communicate directly to God through his Son? And that's something for us to reflect upon today. Thank you very much, everyone.